Not many years had passed, and Elphin's fortune indeed did improve. And Elphin was one day at the court of King Maelgwn. And Maelgwn had bards, poets and singers that would come and entertain him. And Maelgwn said, "My wife is the most virtuous of women. My bards are the finest in all the land." And Elphin stood and he said, "It is not for me to quarrel with a king, but were you not a king, I would say to you that my wife is the most virtuous of women, and I have in my house a child who is greater than any bard in your land." The king was enraged. "You do not speak thus to a king." And Elphin was placed into prison. And the King Maelgwn called his cousin Rune. Rune was a scoundrel. Rune was a scallywag. Rune was a seducer of women. And he said to Rune, "Go to the home of Elphin and prove that his wife is not the most virtuous of women." And so Rune set off on his way. But Taliesin knew all things. Taliesin knew what had transpired. Taliesin spoke to the wife and told the wife of Elphin what was taking place. And so a maidservant was brought forth, and a maidservant was dressed in the clothes and the jewelry and the finery of Elphin's wife. Rhun came. The maidservant greeted her as though she was the lady of the home. And Rhun plied her with drink and gave her a drink that had a sleeping potion in it. And while she was asleep, he forced himself upon her, and then he cut off one of her fingers and took it back to King Maelgwn. Maelgwn called forth Elphin from the prison, and he said, "Rhun has seduced your wife. Here is the proof." And Elphin said, "I do not know whose finger this belongs to, but it does not belong to my wife. For my wife takes care of her fingernails. And look, you will see these nails have not been pared in many a long month. My wife does not do labor, and yet you see the calluses upon the knuckles. And it has been many a long year since my wife has kneaded rye dough, and yet beneath the fingernails is the dough of a woman who has been kneading the bread. This is not the fingernails of my wife." Enraged, Maelgwn sent Elphin back to the prison, and Taliesin, though still a child, set forth on the way to the castle to rescue his foster father. It was a time when Maelgwn would call forward his bards to entertain him, and Taliesin, still a child, sat by the door to the great hall. And as the bards walked in, Taliesin played Blerum. He played Blerum, Blerum. Blerum, Blerum is to go, and so he did. And as the bards went forward, one at a time, Taliesin played Blerum. Well, it came time when King Maelgwn called forward one of his bards to entertain him. And the bard stepped forward, and the bard was to begin his song, and the bard went, and the king was enraged and sent him away and called for another bard. And the bard came forward ready to deliver a poem, and the bard went, And the king called forward the chief of the bards. And he called him forward and he said, "Give me a great poem. Speak to my court." And the great bard said to the king. And the king called one of his soldiers and said, "Strike him." And one of the soldiers went forward and hit him across the head. And then he spoke and he said, "Lord, do not beat me. It is not I. There is a child sitting by the door, and he has put the spell of Blerum upon us all." And Maelgwn called forward the child. And Taliesin came, and Taliesin knelt before the king. And the king said, "You have proven your worth. You have shamed my bards. I am Maelgwn, king in Gwynedd. Who are you?" Then the child rose, and when he rose, he was no longer a child, he was a man. And he answered the king in the ancient tongue, and thus he spoke. "Taliesin yw fi, perffaith fy ngherddi, canaf trwy dydd y barn. Fi yw Taliesin, do'n ddeall pob dirgelion, pan fod buwch yn gorniol a dines yn chwanol, pan fod halen yn hallt a barf ar ben gafr, pan fod llaeth yn wyn a'r egroes yn goch, pan fod alarch yn wyn bod ganddo draed ddi. Do'n gwybod pam. Pan fod nos yn disgyn a'r haul yn codi, pan fod ser yn trwy rewynt am byth. Lle mae cwcw yr haf yn byw yn y gaiaf. Pa bwyst filod sy'n byw dan eigion a môr. Sawl gwaiwffin sydd mewn brwydir. Sawl diferon mewn tywod a pam y boddodd pobl yr aifft dan y ddôn. Taliesin yw fi. Do'n gwybod y cyfan. Profais y gyfan. Bym ar bob ffyrdd. Bym yn gi a hydd. Yn iwrch ar y mynydd. Yn gimp, yn raw, yn bwyll mewn llaw. Bym yn ebol mewn efail am blwyddyn a hanner. Bym yn caeliog brithwyn yn sengi ar iair. Bym yn gronin y ryd ar ochr y mynydd. Cyn i fi fod a fedi, disgynnais i lawr, a daeth iar heibio a'i fwyta. Am 9 diwrnod a noswaith yn 2 mynnau chro. Taliesin yw fi. Bym yn ddyn, bym yn dduw, byn farw, byn fyw. Taliesin yw fi. Perffaith fy ngherddi. Byw bydd yr awen tan diwedd y byd. Wow.